Welcome to TV, Tennessee Valley Church. Last week I began a series here on TV Church that will take us all the way to Easter. We'll first spend a few weeks in the Hebrew Scriptures, what we sometimes call the Old Testament. And we'll be looking for signs and predictions of the Messiah. We began with the story of Abraham last week. We wrapped up talking about the near sacrifice of Abraham's and Sarah's only son, Isaac. Isaac was the child of promise, born to Abraham and Sarah, the son through whom God would fulfill His vow to make of Abraham's descendants a great nation and to bless the whole world through them. We're going to pick up with Isaac today with a love story and family drama. Isaac grew to be a young man, and one day Abraham said to his chief servant, probably Eleazar, "Go to my home country, present-day Iraq, and find for Isaac a wife from among my people." Eleazar prayed for God's direction and had barely said amen when he met a young lady named Rebekah. And Eleazar just knew she was the one. He must have been a great salesman, for Rebekah agreed. Arrangements were made, and the two headed back for Rebekah to marry Isaac. Rebekah and Isaac were married, and God blessed them with twin boys, Jacob and Esau. Years later, in a most disheartening act of fraud and deception, Jacob, the youngest twin, tricked Esau, the oldest twin, out of the all-important family birthright and blessing. Isaac was old and easily fooled. Jacob took advantage of his dear old dad and stole the birthright and blessing that belonged by cultural rights to Esau. So the bloodline from Abraham to Jesus would run through Jacob. But how could God build a nation on Jacob when Jacob was the kind of guy who would swindle his father for the blessing and birthright? That's a hard question. And Jacob is not the last religious figure we've wondered about. Most of us have been disappointed by scandals involving religious figures. Most of us have been let down and disgusted by some Christian leaders. Sometimes ministers' behavior is so ugly, so abusive, so shameful that they forfeit their ministries altogether, and rightfully so. And yet there are other spiritual leaders whose sins are not as egregious as, say, abuse. They're just like Jacob, kind of sketchy, and yet God still uses them. Grace is a strangely wonderful thing. Jacob and family were somewhere in the southern part of Canaan, in the area of Hebron and Beersheba. Having scammed Esau and fearing Esau's retaliation, Jacob ran. He fled far to the north to his uncle Laban's place in Haran, which is now southern Turkey. Jacob went to work for his uncle and eventually married his uncle's daughters, Leah and Rachel. Yes, Jacob had two wives, and yes, they were his first cousins. And no, I'm not going to make a joke about us Alabamians marrying our cousins. Just remember, that was another day. Jacob is an enigmatic, confusing figure, to be sure. And maybe because he was so complicated and because he played such an important role in God's story, God decided Jacob needed some extra attention. So He gave Jacob 3 dramatic experiences. Genesis 28 says, one evening in his sleep, Jacob saw a ladder, the top of which reached into heaven. In the dream, God renewed the promise God had made to Jacob's grandfather, Abraham, to give Jacob's people the land and to bless the world through Jacob's descendants. Jacob named the place Bethel or Bethel, which means the house of God. And Genesis 32 tells us one night an unusual character grabbed Jacob and they wrestled until sunup. The man told Jacob that from that moment his name would be Israel, roughly translated, struggles with God. So Jacob, Israel, is the man for whom the nation of Israel is named. He called the place Peniel, meaning the face of God. Many, by the way, believe that the one with whom Jacob wrestled was one of those physical, intermittent, temporary appearances of God the Son in the Old Testament. Years later, Jacob and family were living in a city named Shechem, present-day Nablus. In Genesis 35, God spoke to Jacob and said, "Go back to Bethel and settle there." Jacob went back to Bethel, back to that sacred place where he had initially dramatically encountered God. In Bethel, God again appeared to Jacob, and Jacob reaffirmed his commitment to the Lord. It's interesting that God eventually invited Jacob back to the place of one of their encounters. Go back to Bethel, God invited Jacob. May I pull over just for a moment and ask, is there anybody watching who needs to go back to your own Bethel? Back to a time maybe when your relationship with God was strong and your commitment solid and your heart at peace? Have you wandered, drifted? The Lord would love to have you come back. Fast forward several years. Jacob and his two wives, Leah and Rachel, had 12 sons. Those 12 sons became the fathers of the 12 tribes or clans of Israel. Jacob's favorite son was Joseph, and Joseph's brothers hated Joseph for that. One day, in an act of jealous hatred, Joseph's brothers stripped him, whipped him, and shipped him, sold him to some traveling merchants on their way to Egypt, and told their daddy that Joseph had been killed. In Egypt, Joseph was sold into slavery, and then Joseph was unfairly imprisoned. Fast forward several more years, and through a surprising series of spectacular situations, Joseph had risen to be the second most significant man in Egypt, second only to Pharaoh. There was a terrible famine that extended across Egypt and all the way northward into Canaan, where Joseph had grown up, where Joseph's family and brothers still lived. Joseph was placed in charge of distributing the food in Egypt's vast and bulging storage bins. And Joseph's brothers, well, they traveled to Egypt to see if they could get food. I can only imagine Joseph's shock that day when he looked up and behold, strolling across the floor of that elegant room toward where Joseph was seated were his brothers. They didn't recognize Joseph. But I imagine that as soon as Joseph saw them, painful old feelings and memories welled up inside him. To really shorten the story, Joseph forgave his brothers, loved them, extended grace to them, and he gave them all the food they needed, despite how cruelly they had treated him, just like Jesus would forgive his executioners 1,800 years later. Reminds me of a story. Dog lovers might want to cover your ears. Bill Henson described how much he loved his hunting dogs and the lengths he went to make sure they were well taken care of. He had a screen around their pen like the screen of our old screen doors so that bugs wouldn't bother them. He had a thermostatically controlled mat for them in the winter. Even what he called a sewage system over in one corner of their area. Bill Henson loved his dogs. One winter day, Bill and a friend were out hunting quail. As they walked, suddenly a quail flew up and Bill shot him when the quail was barely off the ground. Immediately after the shot, he heard the cry of his dogs. Bill didn't know it, but those dogs had circled around behind the quail and they were pointing as good bird dogs do. Bill had accidentally shot both his dogs. One of them staggered over to the bird, and just before picking it up to bring it to his master, the dog fell over dead. The other walked badly wounded to Bill and licked his hand. She was suffering terribly, wounded so badly she would not survive. Bill had to put her out of her misery. Bill wrapped his two beloved dogs in his hunting jacket and buried them there. Bill later wrote, "Through that awful experience, the cross became more real to me. If my dogs had snarled and snapped at me, or even if they had run away, if they had been angry, then I could have taken what I had done a lot easier. But the fact remained that they reached out to me and still loved me. And in spite of our sin, Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. Joseph forgave his brothers, and his family came to live with him in Egypt. And all was well until Joseph's friend, the Pharaoh, died, and a new Pharaoh came to power. Sometimes a new administration will come in and reverse, cancel, nullify policies of the previous administration. Have you heard of that? Well, that's what happened here. A new Pharaoh cared nothing about the previous Pharaoh's relationship with Joseph's family, the Hebrew people. He simply saw these Hebrew people as foreigners and cheap labor, so he enslaved them. For 400 cruel years, the Hebrew people were slaves in Egypt. The Hebrew people had to build houses and cities for their Egyptian masters and under harsh conditions. It was agonizing. It was dehumanizing. It was torturous. God had not abandoned His people, though. Next week, we'll see how God delivered His people from their awful enslavement. But first, back to Joseph, just for a moment. Before his death, when he knew he was dying, Joseph made a request of his family. It's in Genesis 50, verses 24 and 25. Joseph said to his brothers, I'm about to die, and you're going to have to bury me here in Egyptian soil. But when God takes you back to that land that He promised our great-grandfather Abraham, and I know He will, I want my bones dug up, taken to, and reburied in that land of promise. 4 centuries passed. Then came the day when God used Moses to lead the people out of Egypt. And the Bible tells us in Exodus 13 that they exhumed the body of Joseph and carried it with them. It took them 40 years to get to the promised land. Finally, and this is the coolest thing, Joshua 24 verse 32 reads, Now Joseph's bones, which the Israelites had brought up from Egypt, were buried at Shechem. More than 400 years since his request, Joseph's bones were buried in the promised land. When Joseph died, his people were enslaved and things looked bad. But Joseph knew God would get them back to the promised land. When I come back, I'm going to talk about what it looks like when nothing seems to make sense, and then everything comes together.
Well, I'm really excited today because I have some local celebrities with me. I have Takela and Demariana and Jada, and they have become celebrities in like the last 6 days, right? Yeah. And you have probably seen them, but you may not recognize them because they're dressed a little bit differently than they were in their viral video. So can you just like sing a few lines of what's made you famous so that we know?
Sure.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we got to do the clap. Okay, come on.
How many inches of snow did you get today? Oh,
How many inches of snow did you get today? Did you get by 3 or did you get by 5? How many inches of snow did you get today?
one more time for the church. How many inches of snow did you get today? Oh,
How many inches of snow did you get today?
did
you get by 3 or did you get by 5? How many inches of snow did you get today?
That was awesome.
Just give you a little snippet.
That is fantastic. So your video that you made during our, Huntsville snow, which happens maybe once a year, since last Friday, 5 million views.
Yes.
Is that right? Did you anticipate that when you thought it was going to be popular? You were
No, I
excited?
didn't know it was gonna be 5 million. I didn't because when I posted it, I was like, I'm gonna be playing y'all. So I was like, it might go somewhere because it's a snow song. So I didn't know it was gonna get like 5 million views. That did surprise me. I was like,
That is amazing.
in 6 days, 5 million views. I was like, I didn't know it was gonna get that far. I thought it was gonna stay in the K's, but it done got to the M's.
That's amazing. Well, tell me about the three of you, how you know each other.
This is my sister.
Okay.
And this our cousin sister.
All right. And how long have you been singing together?
Well, the three of us, we've
been singing together
all our
Okay,
lives.
I guess that's fair.
And the three of us been singing together. We really just started.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you post videos like this often, or this is
No, this is our first time. I just felt like clowning in the snow. Yeah.
So when you're not making viral videos, what do you do?
We actually are artists.
Great.
We gospel artists. So
That's great.
All we do is sing, and we usually make gospel videos. But that day we just felt like clowning, and I was like, I was on live. I was like, hey, I made the song when I was on a live stream, and I was like, I want to make a song. I was like, I want y'all to sit here and watch me make a song. And I made the song. I wanted to do it in the house, and then I was like, nah, y'all, we got to go out there in the snow and do it. So I got off live. I was like, we're going to record it, and I'm going to post it, y'all, and we're going to see how it go. And so I was like, I got to come up with some lyrics first, though. And then I got to doing a little church clap, and I was like, okay, yeah, we in the dough.
Well, it was pretty fun. So our pastor, Travis, is doing a sermon series that's talking about where we see Jesus in surprising places, like the Old Testament, and how it all points to him. And that's like snow video pointing to Jesus. That's amazing. So that's kind of fun. So tell me a little bit about the group God's Children.
Well, when we were little, I had a brother, his name is Elbert, and he just got us to harmonizing. And my mama heard it, she was like, do it again. So we did it again, and she was like, well, y'all want to sing? And we said, yeah, and we just been singing ever since.
Okay. Well, that's great. I know people are going to want to see more, and we actually are going to get to hear a little more from you in a minute.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay, well, let's move in there so we can hear that.
All right.
It won't be long before God separates the right from the wrong. It won't be long before God separates the right from the wrong. You better get your business fixed and your mind made up. He's gonna separate the right from the wrong. You better get it together. Jesus is coming back. He's gonna separate the right from the wrong. He's gonna separate the right from the wrong. No more blame, no more black and white. We are precious in His sight. He's gonna separate the right from the wrong.
There were struggles in this story of the Hebrew people. Struggles that seemed confusing and disheartening. Famine, enslavement. For 4 centuries, it looked like that promise God made to Abraham about the promised land had been either forgotten or broken. And then, after the Exodus, came the hardships of the wilderness. What was God doing? But one day, they crossed the Jordan River into the promised land, and it all came together. Finally. No one could have seen, I guess, how God was going to orchestrate history to do what God had promised Abraham He was going to do. Sometimes things don't make sense until the director pulls it all together. When I was in the 9th grade was part of the junior high school, and we were separate from Anniston High School. A high school teacher who directed the annual spring musical, again there at the high school, invited me in junior high to be in that musical. We're doing Fiddler on the Roof, he said, and I said, sure. I didn't know what Fiddler on the Roof was. I didn't even know what a musical was. I was so uncultured, unlearned, unschooled, unenlightened. But now going over to the high school where there were 10th, 11th, and 12th grade girls, well, that seemed like a cool thing to do. For the first few weeks, we sat in chairs and just learned songs that some of you might know, like Tradition and Sunrise, Sunset. I assumed we were going to give a concert. I really thought that. I didn't know what Fiddler on the Roof was. And then a few weeks before the performances, a man showed up who was a retired choreographer from New York, and he began to teach us dances. And I thought, well, we're going to sing and to dance. Then, closer to the performances, our songs and dances began to be interspersed with people saying lines. And I realized that all the while, unknown to me, these characters had been rehearsing. And on the week of the performance, they gave out costumes. And this is no joke. It was not until the week of the dress rehearsal that I saw it all come together. I was dumbfounded at how elaborate and well orchestrated it was. It was a big-time musical, and the crowds that came, I was astounded. The director had been at work in ways I was not aware of until it all came together. Maybe your life feels all out of sorts. You can't figure out the rhyme or the reason for the tough times. Well, remember, sometimes things don't make sense until the director pulls it all together. For me, there have been lots of times when circumstances didn't make sense to me until they did. When I looked back and said, now I see how God was orchestrating things to fulfill His purposes and to do good for me. Being Easter people means being people of hope. Being Easter people means remembering that when all seemed lost, God brought His people to the promised land. And when all seemed lost, God brought His lifeless Son out of the tomb. Being an Easter person means believing one day the director will pull it all together.
Surely your goodness and loving kindness will follow me all my life. Surely your goodness and loving kindness will follow me all my life. You are my shepherd, I shall not want. When you are my shepherd, I shall not want. Surely your goodness and loving kindness will follow me all my life. Surely your goodness and loving kindness will follow me all my life. When you are my shepherd, I shall not want. You are my shepherd, I shall not want. Even when I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil, for you are with me. Even when I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil, for you are with me. And you're a good father, you'll never leave me, you never forsake me, you never forsake me. And you're a good father, you'll never leave me, never forsake me. You never forsake me. And you're a good father, and you'll never leave me. You never forsake me. You never forsake me. And you're a good father, and you'll never leave me. You never forsake me. You never forsake me. When you are my shepherd, I shall not want. When you are my shepherd, I shall not want.
Fairly often, I hear from someone who feels ashamed or embarrassed because they don't understand some basic things about the Bible and or the Christian faith. So, on Sunday, January 12, in the chapel of First Baptist Church of Huntsville at 600 Governors Drive at 9:15, I'm going to begin a 7-week study called Things I Wish I'd Learned in Sunday School. There's no chance you'll get called on for anything, but you will have a chance to ask questions. If you'd like to join us at 9:15 in the chapel beginning January 12, we'd love to have you. If you'd like a digital copy of Things I Wish I'd Learned in Sunday School, whether you come in person or not, you may email your request to publications@fbchsv.org. Thanks for watching. I hope 2025 is a great year for you.
What you bringing to the campfire today? Oh, what you bringing to the campfire today? Is you bringing more? Please don't forget your chores. What you bringing to the campfire today?
Can I say it one more time?
What you bringing to the campfire today? Oh, what you bringing to the campfire today? Is you bringing more? Please don't forget your chores. What you bringing to the campfire today? Oh, I said bring it to the campfire. Your kids, bring it to the campfire. Go on and bring it to the campfire. We excel, bring it to the campfire. Your children, bring it to the campfire. Your candies, bring it to the campfire. You got to bring it to the campfire. I just bring it to the campfire. Oh, bring it to the campfire. You gotta bring it to the campfire.